There is this thing that happens right around the time you hit your mid-40s. You wake up one day, pour your coffee, and realize you are carrying around a heavy toolbox full of other people's rules. Rules about money. Truths that got handed down to us by our parents, by our bosses, by society. And they get passed around like old family recipes that nobody actually likes eating anymore, but we all keep cooking them because we think we are supposed to. You know the ones I'm talking about. The loudest one is usually about real estate. The rule says you need to buy a house as soon as you possibly can. Put down roots. Lock into a 30-year mortgage. And whatever you do, never, ever rent. Renting is throwing your money away. That's the script, right? And then there's the rule that says you need to save absolutely every single penny you make. Put your head down, grind it out in a job you barely tolerate, and just wait until you hit 65. And then magically, you get to retire and live happily ever after. Yeah, about that. By the time you get to midlife, you start looking around and realizing that a lot of those so-called truths, they just don't line up with the reality we are actually living in today. Maybe you followed the rules. Maybe you bought the house. And now that house is just eating you alive. The roof needs doing. The property taxes jump every single year. And you spend your entire weekend fixing plumbing instead of actually resting. You own the house, but it feels a lot like the house owns you. Or maybe you didn't buy one. I'm a renter. It makes sense for my life right now. But let me tell you, every time you go to a family barbecue or a neighborhood block party, someone looks at you like you completely missed the boat. Like you failed some invisible adulthood test.
Or maybe you are just exhausted. You're tired of pretending that maxing out your retirement accounts somehow makes up for the fact that you feel constantly, deeply burned out by Thursday afternoon. These money myths we carry around, they don't just confuse us. They actively hold us back. They make us feel like we are failing, when the truth is, we are just living in a completely different world than the one those rules were designed for. By midlife, we have accumulated so many of these heavy shoulds that they start to weigh us down. They keep us stuck in patterns that stopped doing us any good a long time ago. And I think it's time to start unpacking that box. Let's talk about the biggest myth of all. The one that gets drilled into our heads from day one. The idea that money automatically equals security. Look, money helps. Nobody is going to sit here and deny that having cash makes life easier. But security? Security is not just a high score sitting in a bank account. Security is about flexibility. It's about having room to maneuver when things go sideways. You can have $1 million on paper and still feel completely trapped if every single dollar is tied up in maintaining a lifestyle you don't even enjoy anymore. Think about the guys you know who look like they are winning the game. The ones who look incredibly financially successful from the outside. You know the exact setup I'm talking about. They've got the massive house with the perfectly manicured lawn, 2 pristine vehicles in the driveway. The kids are in the absolute best schools. But then you get a beer with them. You sit in their expensive backyard and you find out they are stressed to the absolute breaking point. They are terrified of losing their job. They can't even afford to take a real vacation where they actually turn their phone off because they are living right up to the absolute edge of their massive income. One missed paycheck, one bad quarter at the firm, and the whole house of cards comes down. That is a very expensive form of anxiety. Real security is having options when life decides to throw a curveball right at your head. It's knowing that if the inevitable happens, if the corporate restructuring comes down the pipe and you get that layoff notice and the severance package, you aren't immediately in crisis mode.
Sometimes having options means having a big, boring emergency fund. Just cash sitting there doing absolutely nothing but buying you peace of mind. But sometimes it means keeping your living expenses low enough that you could actually survive a massive pay cut if you had to. Or it means keeping your skills sharp. It means having multiple ways to bring in $1. Maybe it's building up a quiet portfolio on the side, slowly dripping regular dividends so you aren't completely chained to one single employer's payroll department. The bitter irony of all this is that chasing the appearance of security usually leaves us incredibly exposed, because we end up building a life that requires everything to go exactly right every single day just to stay afloat. And if you've lived on this earth for 4 decades, you know that life is rarely that cooperative. I have watched good friends stress themselves into actual physical health problems trying to maintain a lifestyle they thought they were supposed to have. The fancy address that absolutely requires 2 massive incomes and 0 mistakes. The trucks that have to be traded in every 3 years just to look like the business is booming. It is an exhausting treadmill of keeping up with everyone else that never actually stops, because there is always someone further up the street doing better. There's another myth I hear constantly, and this one does more damage than almost anything else. It's the tired voice in your head that says it's too late to start. Guys hit their late 40s or early 50s and they just assume the window slammed shut. They look at where they think they are supposed to be, they look at where they actually are, and they just decide there is no point in even trying anymore. The cement has dried. But money is not about being early. It's about being intentional. You can do a massive amount of course correction in 10 or 15 years if you just stop trying to catch up to some imaginary timeline and start making smarter, quieter moves right now. Sometimes making a smarter move means quietly paying down your debt, just grinding it out, instead of trying to play the market with one hand while you are drowning in credit card interest with the other. Sometimes it means switching careers entirely, even if it means taking a pay cut in the short term, because you can read the writing on the wall in your industry and you know it's a dead end. Sometimes it's finally having the spine to charge what you are actually worth, instead of undervaluing yourself out of habit. And look, I should probably admit something here before I get too far into giving advice. I am not speaking from some mountaintop of perfect financial wisdom. I have the scars to prove it. I started my own operating company a few years back, and I definitely did not have it all figured out. In fact, I completely fell for the myth of what a real business was supposed to look like. I thought I needed to look established on day one, so I went out and signed a heavy lease on this fancy commercial office space that I absolutely did not need. I can still smell the fresh paint and the expensive carpet cleaner. I paid extra to have this frosted glass door with my holding company's name etched right into it. I bought the heavy oak desk, the expensive leather chairs. I was bleeding thousands of dollars a month before I even had a steady client roster. I remember sitting in that expensive leather chair at 2 a.m, staring at my accounting software on the glowing monitor, sweating through my shirt, feeling like a complete moron. The people around me were incredibly patient,
but I knew they were watching me carry this massive, unnecessary stress. I bought all that overhead because I was deeply insecure. I wanted the appearance of success before I had done the actual grueling work. Did I make mistakes? Yeah, more than I can recount without wincing. But I finally had to admit that waiting for the perfect time was just an excuse, and pretending to be a big shot was just ego.
Truth is, dealing with reality is the only way out. The people I see who actually turn their lives around in midlife, they aren't the ones who had some brilliant, flawless strategy from day one. They are the guys who finally stopped beating themselves up about the past. They looked at their mess honestly. The debt, the bad lease, the dead-end job, the stupid spending habits at the drive-thru, and they just made different, boring choices the next morning. Because 10 years is going to pass, whether you do something or not. You are going to be 55 or 60, either way. The only question is whether you'll be in a better spot or still sitting in the exact same chair, still telling yourself it's too late to turn the wheel. Let's talk about the R word for a second. Retirement. The classic script we all grew up with was remarkably simple. You hit 65, they hand you a cheap gold watch, you quit cold turkey, and you move to a beach somewhere to play golf until your knees completely give out. Sounds fantastic in a bank commercial. But for most of the guys I talk to, that just isn't the whole story anymore. It was never designed to describe what a guy sitting at a desk or running a consulting gig or managing a team in his 60s might actually want out of the last third of his life. Yet we are still dragging around this same outdated framework, these same arbitrary age cutoffs that assume everyone wants to go from full speed to a dead stop overnight. But what if you don't actually want to stop working? What if the problem isn't the work itself, but the brutal commute in the rain, or the miserable corporate politics, or the fact that you haven't had a real disconnected break in a decade? Some guys only hit their real stride in their 50s. They finally figure out what they are actually good at. They stop caring about impressing the vice president, and they figure out how to make a living without killing themselves in the process. More and more guys are just designing their own exits, working part-time, taking on project work where they control the hours, building these messy, interesting portfolio careers where they do a few different things they actually care about, like running a small local team, shooting videos, managing their own investments, instead of one soul-crushing thing they just tolerate for the medical benefits. And a lot of them are doing mini retirements, taking an extended break between jobs, just stepping off the gas for a year to breathe, instead of deferring all their living until some final finish line that might never even feel right when they get there. The math on this changes everything. If you plan to keep your hands busy and earn a little something past 65, the massive pressure drops. You don't have to hoard cash quite as aggressively. If you transition slowly, your spending looks totally different than what those generic online retirement calculators tell you it should be. Which brings me to the bottom line of all this. The real goal when you cross that midlife mark, you have to stop funding the life that other people expect you to live. You have to forget what your parents did in the 90s. Forget what the finance blogs say you should have stacked up by now. You have to sit down in a quiet room and define what wealth actually means in your own terms. Maybe wealth for you means having the flexibility to hit the gym 4 days a week without rushing. Maybe it means getting totally debt-free so nobody owns your time.
Or maybe it means pulling the plug, packing a single bag, and spending 12 solid months walking around Thailand, Da Nang, and Kuala Lumpur, sweating out a decade of corporate stress, just because you finally have the freedom to do it. Doing this is harder than it sounds, because the noise is everywhere. It's in every conversation with that colleague who just upgraded his house again. It's in every retirement calculator that flashes red and tells you you're somehow behind. It's in every well-meaning relative who asks when you are going to settle down and buy property. Following someone else's blueprint for financial success is the absolute fastest way to build a life that looks phenomenal on a spreadsheet, but feels entirely hollow when you are sitting alone in the dark. You end up optimizing for metrics that don't matter to you, square footage, job titles, while neglecting the things that do. Money matters. Let's not pretend it doesn't. You need a plan. But what money is actually supposed to buy you is space. Space to breathe. The freedom to say no to a bad boss. The luxury of not having to make every single life choice based purely on which path pays an extra 50 cents an hour. Money can buy you time to figure out what you actually want to do with the years you have left. It can buy you the space to become the person you were probably supposed to be before life got so damn busy. I am not telling you to throw your financial planning out the window. I am just saying, maybe it's time to question whose version of success you are sweating so hard to fund. Maybe it's time to get brutally honest about what you really want your money to do for you. And maybe it's time to stop feeling guilty because you want something different than what the brochures say you are supposed to want. Think about the rules you've been carrying. Is there a money myth you finally stopped believing? Or maybe one you are still struggling to pry out of your head? I'd actually like to hear what's shifting for you lately. Drop a note down below in the comments. Next time, we'll talk about what happens when you finally stop planning and actually pull the trigger on a ticket to Southeast Asia. If this kind of conversation helps quiet the noise a bit, hit subscribe. We'll talk again soon.